Also, there are two things to think about. One is when people are giving online, there's usually a reoccurring option where they can set a gift and make it like weekly or monthly or whatever, and they can just set and forget it. When you're doing your stewardship campaigns, you have to remember to encourage people to go back and reset their gift for the next year, right? Otherwise, it just keeps coming the same. So when you're asking people to increase their giving and all that, make sure you remind them to go back and check, because a lot of people sometimes just set it and forget it, right? And that can be something we want to make sure we remind them of. The reoccurring feature is wonderful. If yours doesn't have it, I would make sure you looked into one that had it, because you can set it and forget it. But we also have to remember that they are going to set it and forget it, and we've got to remind them and ask them to do that. The other thing that I would say about online giving is to make sure that there are multiple ways to receive the money on the online. So not only, ACH, direct debit, credit card, all that stuff, but also have multiple funds that they can give to, right? So you'll want to be able to have somewhere where they can give to your annual stewardship campaign. You'll want to have somewhere where they can give maybe to your endowment. You want to have somewhere where maybe they can give to a mission directly or something. You don't want to give them a lot of choices, but you do want to create those specific buckets or funds in order to make sure that they can direct and, kind of say what they want their money to go to. Because again, like we talked about this morning, that's an extremely important part of donor giving these days is directing and having some say in where their money goes. So make sure you're directing that. Make sure you're providing those buckets so you can steer them into those priorities with multiple funds in there. Does that make sense? What are people finding with their online giving? Are they getting a lot of people using it? Is it helpful? What are you experiencing?
We're having a...
Jane, you're on mute again. You got to try to unmute. There you
We're
go.
having...
Oh.
Well, we'll try it this way. We're having a really good turnout with people giving online.
Okay.
Or if not giving online, then they're going bank to bank, so it doesn't cost them anything. And especially now during the pandemic, I would say we probably have increased it. I would have to go back. That's my job for Finance Committee on our September meeting to see how many actually have started doing that. But we've had a good turnout.
Good. Anybody else having good success with theirs? Jane, are you finding that a lot of variety of people are doing it as well? I mean, we're finding that when we first started this in 2012, that we figured it would be like the younger generation, millennials, those types of folks. And what we're finding is it's across the generations. Doesn't matter on your demographics. A lot of people are using it. Are you finding the same thing?
Yes. We are finding it all different types. I mean, we have somebody who's in their upper 80s that decided to do online because she thought it was great. So for both kinds, online and for the bank to bank, it's all generations. And actually, probably a better portion of the people there are 65 and older, retired, that are starting to do it.
Good.
Maybe they have the time. I know some of them do the online because they get points for travel, which they're not going anywhere now, but they're building them up. So,
Right.
So it's been very, very good for us.
Well, good.
Steve, you mentioned that mobile, it was important to have a mobile app capability for your online giving. Are there as many choices available? I mean, is that as customizable as, the regular conventional online giving?
Yeah, most of the time, mobile friendly means that it can just be viewed even through a browser on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's things
Mm-hmm.
like sizing. It's things like limiting text. It's things like making it simple like that. Not necessarily an app, but
Okay.
just making sure that it's mobile friendly, right?
Okay.
So like I said, with the size of a logo, it may look good on a laptop, but it's too big for the phone screen, right? So you've got to make sure that it's, you know, adaptable and can be mobile. Now, there are, you know, apps. There are text to give options as well. Usually those are add-ons to programs and cost a little more, but some of those are good as well. I will tell you what we're finding is text to give is not as significant as it is to do an app or to be mobile friendly. So a lot of folks will say, well, we got a text to give. They've heard that a lot of money comes in from text to give. Not necessarily so. As long as you have an easy way for someone to get to the donation page and it's mobile friendly, that seems to be the most important part of an online giving program, to do that. When you do it through ours, we give a URL address directly to the donation page. So then you can use that URL address on publications, you can use it in emails, you know, all that stuff. So people just hit that URL address and they go right to the donation page. We also give you a QR code, you know, the QRL codes, the funny little squares that you can hold your phone up to. Mm-hmm. Those are becoming less and less popular. And then with our URL address, well, we also give you a link that you can put on your social media. It's called a Give Now button. So you'll see it all, you know, it's just a green button. It says Give Now, and you can put it on different pages on your website or on your Facebook, and people can just click that and go right to the donation page and make a gift. Those things, Linda, seem to be more important than an app or a text to give or those kinds of things. And that's what I mean by mobile friendly. That's the mobile friendly piece of it. Yeah.
Well, and that's one thing that in so many nonprofits that are bigger than us are better at making those options really easy than churches typically have been, at least in our area. Right. You know, that Give Now button's super easy.
Yeah. Anything else about online giving that you've experienced or that you'd like to share? The last thing I will say about the online giving is online giving's transactional. And I think we talked a lot about this morning. It's got to go above and beyond transaction, right? So you got to figure out a way to make it available for people to give when they feel motivated to give, or you've got to motivate them to give at that point where the transaction is. So, you know, while we can give you a donation page, we can put your logo and all that, the effectiveness of this is going to depend on how many stories you tie to that, how you tell the story, how you get them to that donation point, when you get them to there, right? So right now, we're all pretty much doing things virtually. We're doing virtual worship. I think most of you are doing virtual worship. You know, you got to have that URL address to the donation page somehow in your virtual presence, right? So if you're doing worship and people are feeling, you know, moved to support and make a gift, or you're asking for that, you got to have that address out there. You've got to make it easy for them to go from, I feel the call to give, and now I've got to actually give. You've got to make that seamless, and you've got to make that easy for them to do that, okay? So you've got to include it. You've got to, like you said, Give Now buttons everywhere, right? A Give Now button should be on every page of your website. Easy to do. Put them out there. That way, if someone's looking at your website and they see something that excites them, they can easily hit and give, right? They don't have to hunt. They don't have to search for it. So make it easy. And that's what this slide says. Make it easy. Make it easy for them. And again, we talked about this morning, you know, donor-centered. It's easy for them, not necessarily easy for you. And I think that's sometimes is something we overlook too. We want to make it easy for the church and for our processes and our paperwork. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be easy for that, but it's more important to make it easy for the donor, right? Because if it's easy, they'll do it. If it's hard, they won't, right? So make sure it's easy for the donor. Okay, does that make sense? Sorry, I don't mean to harp on that, but that is extremely important to me. I see a lot of times where it's easy for the financial secretary or the treasurer. It's not easy for the donor, and then they wonder why they're not getting any gifts. So make it easy for the donor, okay? All right, next slide, budget. How many of us still do a line item budget? Y'all should be raising your hand. Logan, I think, yeah, you're raising your hand. I got it. I see it. You should. Line item budgets are extremely important. They help you handle the finances of the church. It helps you see, what is needed financially. It helps you create trends, right? So you can look from year to year and see what's going on and make decisions and all that stuff, okay? How many of you use that line item in your solicitation appeal for your annual campaign? How many of you provide that in your information? Okay, a few of you still do. I would encourage you to rethink that. I would challenge you, as I said earlier, we're going to challenge people. I would challenge you to rethink that. A line item budget is really good internally, and it's really good to help make decisions, and it's really good for session to look at and to make those tough decisions. But I will challenge you for donors. Donors, it's far more important to what? See the impact, right? They want to make a difference. A line item budget doesn't necessarily show them the difference that money's making. It shows them where the money goes, and it shows where you're having expenses, but it doesn't show the impact. That's done through stories. How many of you ever heard of a narrative budget? How many of you have used a narrative budget? Oh, good, you have. Fabulous. Keep doing it. If you're doing it and you still haven't seen a whole lot of success, I would encourage you to be patient and keep doing it. We have seen quite a bit of positive change from doing a narrative budget. The narrative budget is the process of telling the story around the dollars. So when you do a line item budget, you have a bunch of lines, and you have what you budgeted and then what came in for that, and they hopefully match, and you're ahead of budget over here, or you're behind, and all that stuff. What the narrative budget does is it classifies all the stuff in the line items into mission categories. So worship, mission, education, those types of things. And then you take the different line items that fit under there. Now, the building obviously touches on all of those categories. So you have to do some math and say, well, how much of the building is spent on worship? How much is spent on mission activities? How much is spent on education and stuff? So you kind of have to take some time and do, a time cost analysis on your budget. And then what you do is you add those up over the categories, and your narrative budget shows how much money is spent on worship, how much is spent on mission, education. And then the narrative part is you start telling the impact stories of each one of those categories, right? So it gets to tie the output to the dollars, the impact to the dollars, the stories to the dollars. So counting how many people come into the building now becomes important, right? So you can say we spent $50,000 this year on our building, but we had 50,000 people come in. That's great, right? I mean, that's a good ratio. So you start doing that, and then you start adding pictures to it. So you get pictures, you get a narrative description of it. You start breaking all that down, and you start looking at this programmatically instead of line item by line item, okay? And you give that to a donor instead. You still have the line item budget, because there will be people that'll still want to see that, and that's fine. Transparency says you should show them that, and that's good. But it's just, we're saying, don't lead with that, right? Lead with the impact, lead with the stories, create something that they're going to feel good about, that they're going to get excited about, that they can be joyful about, that we can look at from abundance instead of scarcity. That's the other thing too. Line items tend to look at, okay, we don't have enough, okay, to fill that budget, whereas narrative budgets tend to focus more on what we've done, the bigger picture, the abundance. So again, shifting from scarcity to abundance, we can do that. Does that make sense? Okay, great. And then the next step with it too, you'll see on the top of the right side of this slide where it says narrative versus line item, visioning. And we talked a little about this morning. You can start then using this as a visioning tool, and what we can be and what programs we need to do to be better and more impactful in our communities. So you can start doing that. And I think that's a lot harder to do in a line item format, and a much easier to do in a narrative budget impact statement to do that, okay? Any questions on that? Great. So the next slide again talks about those different, so creating ministry areas. We recommend maybe 4, maybe 5. 3 can be enough depending, but usually people can find 4, budget areas that they can break, or mission areas that they can break down and do that. Another piece of this, we talked about this morning as well, and put this into practice, is here's where you can also show time, right? So if we talk about time, talent, and treasure, in a narrative budget, you can also show time and how many, man hours it took for worship, how many man hours have been put into, our mission activities, how many man hours were put into, our educational programs. So we can start to get a full picture of the impact that our congregation is having in these areas. So including a time component, looking at that volunteerism, all of that can be put into a narrative budget. That's really hard to capture in a line item form, okay? So next, let's go into the stewardship campaign itself. And again, we talked about year-round education and year-round talking, but there still is a period of time where we do have to ask, we do have to collect, we do have to do the budgeting and all that stuff. And there still is a need for a campaign period of whatever you want to call that and all that. And how do you do that? Again, for, the risk of beating a dead horse here, the second line about tying to the strategic plan is extremely important, right? Our annual campaign should reflect what we hope to accomplish as a group. I think it was Michael earlier that talked about, staying connected with the donors, the members. This isn't just about session and their desire and what they see for the church. This is connecting with, your members and having those, strategic sessions and understanding where we want to go together as a faith community and making sure that our annual campaign follows that, right? We really want to have that same language, that same understanding, that same feel of our campaign messaging, also with our strategic initiatives. So using the same language, using the same themes, tapping into that so it becomes very familiar to people, not where they get something and go, well, they say this in the strategic plan, but they say this in the annual campaign. I'm not sure how to reconcile that. I don't know what that means, right? We want to eliminate that confusion. So making sure that we're taking language from our vision and our strategic plan and putting that into our annual campaign so it's very comfortable, they understand it, they don't get confused with different language and different terminology, okay? Ask for investments instead of gifts. Has anybody thought about that concept? Has anybody done that? I guess if we're going to talk about fundraising, if we're going to talk about discipleship, we probably should shift our language from, hey, we're soliciting to we're asking for people to invest. We're asking for people to be emotionally connected to what's going on. Does anybody have any experience with that or use that language in their campaigns and what they do? I saw a few heads shake yes, so I think you have. I think you understand it. I think it's a really important part of this too, is to talk about that. I think we see a lot of things on TV and hear a lot of things, and when we see some campaigns and solicitations, especially for programs in Africa or for clean water or stuff, they use a lot of that language, right? They're getting you to invest. They're getting you to be emotionally attached to someone. They're showing the folks in those parts of the world that are benefiting from that. That's what we want to do, right? We want to get them invested. People are going to, commit and give money where their heart is, and we need to get to that heart and get to that passion. The other thing I've heard, and I believe this to be true, is that it takes about 7 times of hearing something before someone actually makes a decision to act. So as we're thinking about this, we have to talk a lot about it. We have to get that out there. We can't assume that one time in one letter, in one way, someone's going to go, oh yeah, I should do that, right? We got to remember it's going to take them a few times to hear it before they act on it. I'm guilty of that. You know, it takes a few times for me to get bought into things before I finally get up and act and actually do it. And I think we probably can understand that and relate to that. The other thing that's on this slide that I think is extremely important is the concept of tithing. How many of us still teach tithing? Is there a reason why we're not teaching tithing? If you're not doing it, there's got to be a reason to do it. Come on, someone's got to be brave. Let me rephrase it then. If you're not teaching tithing, what are you teaching?
I might respond to that if I might, Steve.
Yeah, please, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, just, you know, first of all, the only thing I know about tithing is, you know, the 10% figure, okay? Mm-hmm. Of what?
Of what, right.
There you go. Sure. So I think that's the biggest thing is people don't understand exactly what it is.
Right.
Is it your total income? Is it your net income? Is it your disposable income? Is it right off the top of your paycheck right to begin with? How do you define tithing using those terms?
Yeah, I think that's a valid question. I'm going to throw a question back at you if that's okay. And I apologize if this is a little wrong in direction. Forgive me, I'm going to try it. But I'm going to throw back, does it matter? Does it matter if it's 10% of gross income? Does it net income of your whatever? I would say it probably really does not matter. 10% of something is better than nothing, right? So I think the important parts of the tithing get more into that there is some concept, like Jane said earlier, of giving off the top, right? And I think tithing can be in a broader issue than just that 10%. It can be giving to God of anything first, right? We used to have a program at the foundation called First Fruits, which really emphasized giving to the church first and then making your monthly budget second, right? And I think tithing can be taught that way without necessarily getting focused on the 10% gross, net, whatever, from that aspect. There are some wonderful figures out there that talk about the different denominations and what their members give. And we're about third in the line as far as what our members give as opposed to their annual income. So Steve, I'm answering your question right there, their annual income, right? So that's gross, right? Whatever I'm bringing in annually. And our number is about 1.7%, right? I think the Mormons are at the top. They're like 25% or something because they require this massive amount of giving. Catholics are somewhere just below us, right around 1.5%. I can't remember really the numbers, all that specifically, but I do know we're about third, and we are about 1.7%. So even if we're talking about, tithing in very general, very non-specific 10% of annual or 10% of net or 10% of whatever, it at least can get us to move that needle a little further than 1.7, because I think we would all agree that 1.7 is probably not as high as it should be or could be, or is a good reflection of our Christian stewardship. Does that help, Steve? Does that give you a little pushback on that without being too?
Yeah, it just makes it murky to me somewhat.
Sure.
And didn't redefine that. The only thing I would say is that if you're going to ask somebody to teach something, teach it accurately.
Right.
And I guess I don't know what accurately is, even though I listened to your explanation. Okay.
Sure.
I think the goal should be to try to give people what they can give. I'll get them to that point. If that's 10% or 20% or the actual word tithe, my question was just 10% of what? What does it really mean? Right. So I would like to know what I, as a stewardship campaign person, what I should tell people what it really means. For example, you kind of mentioned the word growth, gross income. Well, you know what? If somebody grosses $100,000 income and they have $99,000 worth of expenses, obviously they can't give 10% of the 100,000, which was their gross.
Mm-hmm.
You see where I'm coming from there?
Sure, I do.
I mean, I'll just say that I would like to teach it accurately if there's some way to teach it.
Right. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I'd like to weigh in.
Sure.
As one of the silent ones, I'm surprised we only get 1.7% on average. But to me, that's why we don't teach tithing. I thought it was about 2.5%. But if we're going to say somehow we want or encourage or expect you to give 4 times more than you're giving now, that's going to be really challenging. And I understand, we wouldn't do that in 1 year, that we encourage people to take gradual steps, with tithing as kind of the goal and even maybe the expectation, the biblical expectation. So, it's because our giving is so far from tithing that I think it's something we don't even want to touch. I'm also curious if maybe our members would tithe, if we could come up with something like that when we think about, well, the church is one of 7 charitable organizations they give to. And maybe our members are giving 10% of their income to charity, but some of it's going to their university or the food pantry or public radio, or it may be that our members are more generous than we give them credit for. And I'm thinking back to that church in Portland, where they highlighted that we give to a lot, we support a lot of important endeavors in the community beyond just the church. By that I mean you support a lot of important endeavors in the community. So I'd be curious to know what that figure was, if there's an average Presbyterian charitable giving percentage as opposed to just church giving.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't have that figure. I mean, I will look around and see if we can find out that figure, because I think you're right, and I think that's good. The 2 things I took away from that, and thank you for sharing, Tom, and Steve, thank you for being challenging and asking us that question. But the 2 things I heard is, one is, I think, the important part of any concept is that it's a goal, right? It's set out there as a goal and something that we probably realize that people aren't going to do, immediately, or flip their switch, or all of a sudden they're going to go 4 times more than what they're averaging giving from that. And the second thing I heard from that too is that, it's the collective participation. It's what we're giving from that. And again, it just reiterates, I think, what we mentioned earlier about, counting all of that and making sure we're open to understanding that our members are participating in a lot of different things and being able to collect that. So thank you from that. Did someone else want to say? I think I saw a hand, or Matt. Yeah.
I was just, I was at a workshop with Cliff Christopher probably 5 or 6 years ago. And at least from what I remember from that workshop, that 1.7% giving was those 7. And it may have been a slightly bigger percentage, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3% of a person's income is what was given to church, St. Jude's,
right.
And all of the charitable giving was in that neighborhood of 2%. And the Presbyterians were kind of in that 3rd or 4th position. I think one of the hardest things, and maybe tithing doesn't, maybe this is sort of the other side of that. I think people are trying to figure out what's my part to play in, what am I getting out of it? So what am I going to put into it, sort of thing. They're not really thinking of it as, what's my share of the ministry, as opposed to I'm going to give what I know God has called me to give. I'm going to try to figure out what I should give.
Right.
And
yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's another messaging issue that we have to address and come to grips with how we deal with, right? Because I think, and I think we said it this morning too, is I think it should come from what is our faithful stewardship, not what is our fair share, right? What is our faithful stewardship? What is our gratitude back to what everything God has given us and how he has blessed us? And the more we give back, the more he'll continue to bless us, as opposed to what's an apportionment, right? What's our fair share? Good question. The last thing on here, Steve, that I just wanted to highlight, and you raised it very well and right on, is that whole idea of teaching financial planning and debt management, right? It is very difficult, Steve, as you accurately pointed out. Someone's making $100,000, they've got $99,000 in expenses. That is difficult then to ask them, to tithe and to challenge and to give to the church or to anything else. So, that is a component of, teaching financial planning, being, fiscally responsible in our own lives, as well in our church lives, and budgeting and all of that stuff. There are lots of programs out there that do that. Ramsey comes to mind as one that's pretty common for folks. I've had churches that have offered that up as part of their stewardship program and had members go through a Ramsey class or some other class to talk about financial planning. But Steve, I think you're right. I think that's something we ought to be able to incorporate and help folks if they want it, right? I don't think it's our job to force anything on people, but that is probably a need, and we do need to understand that, putting your house in order, so to speak, is an important part of financial stewardship, as well as giving to the church, and we can maybe provide that. Has anybody ever gone through one of those types of programs or had that offered at the church? Good. Did you find it helpful, Jane?
We've taught it several times at our church, and we're actually scheduled to do it again. We thought this fall, but with the pandemic, I think we're going to hold off until January. I think my husband and I have taught it 3 or 4 times.
Oh, good for you. Was it a Ramsey one, or was it someone else?
It was Dave Ramsey.
Ramsey's. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Great. The next slide talks about 6 elements of an effective financial stewardship campaign, and identifying and celebrating what members value. I think we talked about that. Mike brought that up this morning very well. Inform members how gifts are being used. We talked about that. Challenging members. I think this conversation kind of goes there. So whether or not it's specifically a tithe or your definition of a tithe, or even challenging them to do more, I think there is a lot of room for us as a denomination and as individual Presbyterians to do more with those numbers. So, it always talking about, increasing and more, and are you doing enough kind of language, I think is a part of a successful and effective campaign. Securing a financial commitment from members. This is an interesting one for me, because I think that I've experienced in some churches a shift in that. How many of us still do pledge cards and all of that format? Yeah, most of us still do, but I've seen a couple of churches that have gone pledge free, to be perfectly honest with you. They had just got into the habit of asking for, gifts all the time, encouraging folks to make, gifts constantly to things. It's really focused them on telling the story and the impact. And a couple of them have really gotten some good traction on it. There's a church just south of Minneapolis that has been doing it for 5 years without pledges, and have been taking in more money each year, percentage-wise, and have continued to have enough to do what they need to do. It's been an interesting concept. I'm just, for me, it's hard because I get it and I understand that we talk about it, but there still is a budgeting component to this, right? And we still like to know what's going to come in and do all of that. There's got to be some way, to marry both of those concepts. But the one thing I do like about, the non-pledge format is, again, it does get us back into the impact and the storytelling and the things that motivate folks more than worrying about, the budget and balancing that. Again, affirming members and acknowledging the responses and evaluating the program. How many of us evaluate our program on an annual basis? Do we do a pretty good job of, debriefing and looking at it and how to do and things we could change, or are we strictly just looking at the dollars as the evaluator of the program? Couple heads shaking. Good. Well, I would encourage you to do that. Again, not only just looking at the dollars of success, but, you know, participation, you know, new members, new giving units, those kinds of things. We do need to look at. One of the scary stats that I've seen lately too is when we lose, for whatever reason, a very long-time member, long-time giver to the church, it usually takes 4 or 5 new giving units to equal what that person, you know, was giving, or that giving unit was giving. So if you have someone that's been in the church 20 years, 25 years, and for whatever reason they're no longer part of the church, and they were giving $10,000, it's going to take 4 or 5 giving units to make up for that $10,000. So, you know, really keeping track of those statistics, understanding that, paying attention to those trends, looking at that can be extremely helpful in how you do that in measuring success. You know, it's not always good enough to just think, okay, we made our goal, or we beat our goal by 10%. Well, how did you beat the goal, right? Do we have new gifts? Is it just a matter of one person upped their gift enough that it covered that? You know, looking at that and deciding if that's good or bad or what's going to happen. The worst thing that could happen is, you know, we've got 50% of our budget or our revenue is taken care of by one person, and then we lose that person. That's going to be a big strain. So, you know, keeping track of that, evaluating the program, looking at the numbers more than just the amount of money that came in, can be helpful in making sure, you know, those things don't happen, or if they're going to happen, we at least have a plan in place to deal with it when it does, or we understand we have to do something to address it. So making sure you're looking at those numbers, and I'll assume that most of you are doing that and looking at that and making sure we're evaluating our program effectively each year. The next slide talks about different types of campaigns. I just threw a few of them out there. You know, direct mail, we talked about letters earlier. All member visitation campaign, you know, visiting and talking with your members is a really good idea. So if you're not doing that on a regular basis, I would encourage you to think about, regardless of what your annual stewardship campaign is, maybe once every 5 years or so, you include a visitation portion where you're going and listening to folks and talking to them, whether it's in small groups, whether it's one-on-one, but you have an opportunity for people to provide feedback. It can help with visioning, it can help with buy-in, it can help them make them feel good about the process, make them feel like they're involved, and making them feel like they've been heard. So I would encourage some type of, you know, visitation, you know, information gathering, engagement of all members above and beyond just a letter, you know, a Sunday thing and all of that. The last one that I threw on here was Consecration Sunday. Has anybody ever heard of Consecration Sunday? Herb Miller has done that. I've participated in before. They can be very impactful if it's done once in a while. I think we find with Consecration Sunday, if you do it every year, the message tends to get lost. But the whole concept of Consecration Sunday is to get beyond the budget and to ask people to think about their giving more from a gratitude, giving back, tithing type of concept, more than, you know, their part, as Matt said, or, you know, part of the budget or whatever. And it's really challenging them to think about that. And they have this big process where they bring in a motivational speaker from outside to do some things with leadership, to do this, you know, the sermon on that day. And then they have a big process for, you know, gathering the commitments, and they call them commitments, not pledges, and all that stuff, and, you know, pin them up on a board and make a big deal out of it. It's really interesting. If you haven't looked at it, I would encourage you to read it. It's Consecration Sunday by Herb Miller. And even if you don't employ, you know, the whole process, there are some good things to glean from it that can be used just on a regular basis for that. But it's good to change up your style and campaigns once in a while too. If you know, comfort's good, but you got to challenge them and get them out of their comfort zone once in a while, and then get them comfortable and shake it up a little, get them comfortable, shake it up a little bit. That seems to be what works really well in the life of stewardship campaigns, is to kind of change it every once in a while. And probably not drastically, but at least tweak it, change it, make it fresh, those kinds of things. Does anybody have any good campaigns they've done that they'd like to share or that they've heard of, or things they've done? Okay. The next slide, I don't know, if we need to take a whole lot of time, but I do want to make sure we touch on it because we think it's an important concept, are the role of leadership. And the first slide talks about the pastor and what their role in this is. They need to talk about their own stewardship. I don't know if the pastors in the group here feel comfortable with that or have done that. I think that's an important aspect of this, is that we need to lead by example. And I know that's difficult. There's a lot of issues around that, but I have seen it work really well when pastors have been willing to be vulnerable and talk about it. And again, not as much in, this is how much I give and look at me and all that stuff, but more of the motivation behind it, the discipline that they use to do their giving, the why they do, the reason they're involved as well. Because there are a lot of times, where leaders will think, well, I'm giving up my time, I'm giving my talents, I shouldn't have to give my treasure or something like that. I think it's helpful if the pastors show that, being a good leader means, also participating and being active in this. Tom, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I was doing some of the same stewardship training a few years ago. And one of the things that was pointed out was generally what we do is we kind of send out the pledge card and don't even talk about the process one might go through to fill it out. It's kind of like, here, complete the form. And so I invited 3 or 4 respected households to come and give minutes for stewardship. Beautiful. Just talking about these are the things we consider. This is the conversation we have prior to filling out our pledge card and bringing it in. And it was very personal. I mean, people are talking about their money and how they spend it. And so it required a certain amount of vulnerability from the leaders. But it was really helpful. It gave insight and new ways for other people to think about how to fill out a pledge card, because literally there had been no instruction except what day to return it.
Right. Oh, I think that's beautiful. I think testimonials are extremely powerful. We talk about that a lot and encourage them to do that. Yeah, I think that's great. Anybody else got any other thoughts or things they've done?
Going back to, you were talking about the Consecration Sunday, one of the things I always appreciated about it was the pledge card. With that on the reverse side, sort of that your income and then what a percentage of that income would look like in terms of your giving. And if I remember correctly, it was usually kind of, can you make one step up, sort of. So maybe you go from 2% to 3%, and you would see both on a monthly basis. It's not that, for probably most people, it is not a huge, significant increase in your overall giving, but it represents sort of that progress toward where you might want to be. But so I think that kind of goes along with what Tom was talking about, the personal side of it, of helping people think about how do you come to that decision of what you're going to give? How did we get there? But then also sort of that practical side of, here's what 3% of my income looks like. Here's what 4% of my income looks like. And, divide it by 12, divide it by 52, however you want to do it. And
yeah. Great.
When we do, there I go again. When we do the testimonials, we do them either 4 to 6 weeks. We try to have different age groups come in. So this year we have a young family with two little kids coming in. Oh. Why they give, and then we have someone older coming in. So we try to hit on different age groups in the congregation, so it's not just the same age group. We do that. We have the thing on the back of our pledge card, and then we usually have a big celebration of the pancake guy coming in, or some kind of dinner, breakfast, whatever. This year we're having a hard time deciding how we're going to do this, right, since we haven't regathered. So we're talking about having everybody drive through somewhere and pick up breakfast, or have coffee while we're having our church service for Consecration Sunday. So we're still thanking the congregation for turning in their pledge, or maybe they didn't, but they still get a thank you for it. You know, maybe they can't this year. So we're trying to come up with some ingenious idea that everybody still feels like we appreciate what they're doing. We're not just asking them for that pledge card this year. Because it's going to be, I think, a difficult year for churches with the pandemic, where people are at. You know, we don't know if people have lost jobs or not, that maybe they haven't told the church about. So we're just trying to come up with some different things this year for our celebration. So
awesome. Great. Thank you. And then the last thing I think that's extremely important role that the pastor can play is cheerleader. I think the pastor has a wonderful opportunity, you know, to act as that, you know, cheerleader, to make sure that everybody's excited about the process, that everybody is thanked, that everybody is, you know, feeling good about the direction we're going, and really acting as that cheerleader in that role. I think that's extremely important. The next slide talks about the session, and I think we've already talked about most of these. So I think, it's just reiterating what we said, and Jane, appreciate that, and Tom as well, about the stories and the testimonials, because that is extremely important in the process. But, you know, they really have to support the process, know the process, be behind the process, you know, be pledgers themselves, be giving units, and also, you know, be leaders in that process as well. The next slide is the online giving program. This is a preview of ours. Again, we talked about that. Most of you are doing that. I think that's great, and would encourage you to continue to make sure that your online giving program is not only functional, but also an integral part and a wonderful way for people to stay engaged and connected with the mission activities. There's the Give Now button. The next few slides I really want to take some time on, because it's really at the core business of what we do, and it's what Cliff Christopher would call easy money. I don't know if it's necessarily easy, but it certainly is a very important aspect of individual stewardship and being faithful disciples and being generous, and that's the planned giving. How many of us have what they would call a planned giving program in place? I see one hand. If you don't, I would encourage you to think about incorporating, you know, planned giving into the life of your, you know, financial education and stewardship programs. Planned giving is really, like I said earlier, something that can really enhance the joyous discipline of giving. It's really the stewardship of everything that we've gathered over our lifetime, and how do we do that? And providing educational opportunities and educational information is extremely important. The number one pushback that we get from donors about a planned gift to the church is that the donor didn't know that a church could handle a planned gift. They know that their university can, they know that the hospital can, because they spend a lot of time educating, you know, their people on doing that. And as a church, we just have not done that to the extent where people feel comfortable that the church knows how to deal with a planned gift. And I think that's something that's easily changed. I think that's something that we can easily do. I think it's something that could be incorporated in all of it, like we talked about earlier on your pledge cards. You know, have you left the church in your will? Would you like to receive more information on leaving a planned gift? Those types of things. I hate to say this because we're Presbyterian and we probably have way too many committees in our church structure as it is, but that is the Presbyterian way to make a committee. But it would be advantageous if there was a planned giving committee at the church. If there was a group of people whose job was to think about this, whose job was to, you know, put a program in place that can educate people, that can receive the gifts, that can use the gifts, and let folks know that, hey, the church can receive this, the church wants to receive this, and that it is part of your stewardship to think about, you know, how you're going to be good stewards of all that you've been given over your lifetime. And part of that is giving it away and doing that. So, you know, create a committee, call it a planned giving committee, call it an endowment committee, a legacy committee, whatever you want. Get some representation on there. Have someone from stewardship also sit in on there, so you have some coordination between stewardship, you know, and the planned giving piece of it. But have them, you know, set up a marketing plan. Have them, you know, coordinate a thank you event. Have them make sure that, you know, anything that is funded from a planned gift or an endowment is celebrated. Make sure that, you know, people know that we were able to do this because of all the generous gifts that came in, you know, from years past. I mean, we are standing on shoulders of people that came before us, right? We are sitting under shade trees that we didn't plant. You know, our buildings are planned gifts, right? We probably, unless your building is, you know, less than 10, 15 years old, you know, we didn't build those, right? You know, those were created a long time ago. Those are gifts. Those are endowments. Those are things we've been left with. And, you know, thankfully, there were generous Presbyterians back in the day that created that opportunity for us today. And we want to continue to do that and provide that for the next generation and do that. One of the easy things that you can do that I've seen churches do, the First Presbyterian Church in Northville, Michigan, does a wonderful job with a legacy society. They have founders of their church. The first pastor and his family, they're called the Yerkes, are very big in that community and founded the church 150 years ago. And the church created the Yerke Society so they can, to Logan's point, remember their past, stay connected to their past. And they've created a society where the only criteria for membership is that you've left the church in your estate plan. You don't have to tell how much, you don't have to prove it, you don't have to do it, you just have to say, yes, I've left the church in my, you know, will or whatever. And you get to be a member of the society. They have a nice dinner, they have a nice speaker, they celebrate this, you know, they talk about it, everybody knows what it is. You know, they try to get, you know, more people in. When I was working with them a few years ago, you know, their goal was to go from 37 to 50 people. And they did that. And I don't know where they are now. Hopefully they're higher than 50. But it's just a nice way to encourage folks to recognize it, to be thankful for doing that. And then, you know, they provide a lot of educational opportunities around that. When I first started working for the foundation, one of my colleagues said that he encouraged congregations to do a 12-4-1 format for planned giving. And that meant that 12 times a year, you put something somewhere, whether it's a bulletin insert, whether it's a newsletter article, whether it's a letter, something, you gave your members 12 times a year some information on a planned gift, whether that's about their bequest, whether that's about life insurance, whether that's about an annuity, something. They got some just a little information. Like I said, a bulletin insert, a letter, a newsletter article, something. And then 4 times a year, they did something a little more involved, like they had a planned giving presentation. You know, bring in an attorney who can talk about estate planning. You know, bring in a funeral director that can talk about end of life activities. You know, bring somebody in that can talk about why they left the church in their will. Something. Give them an opportunity to learn about these ways. And then the one is to have a thank you event, whether that's, you know, a society dinner, to Jane's point, whether that's to have a breakfast or do something like that. Have a thank you event and remember all the people who had left the church, you know, in their estate or, you know, did something, you know, to leave the church in a better place during their life, that kind of stuff. It's a real simple format to follow. It's really easy to do. There are plenty of resources out there. And I would just encourage you to think about, you know, creating a planned giving program like that. Okay.
Well,
any questions about that or any thoughts? Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, what we started in the lobby of our church, we have a plaque that looks like a big tree, and there's gold leaves on the tree. And anybody who has left their Hope Church in their will and already said it and signed some paperwork saying, we have left hope as our legacy, have their name engraved on the tree. It started with one person a few years ago. And I believe it doesn't sound like much, but we have probably a dozen and a half names. So we probably won't have it this year because of the pandemic, getting together with a meal, but we always had a sit-down dinner for those people on the legacy. And their name appears. We had one person that I didn't even think knew about the legacy. And when she passed away a while back, her daughter brought a check in and said, my mom wanted us to leave this to the legacy of Hope Church so people still remember who she was. And it was, I mean, I didn't even know that. So it was kind of a nice story that we didn't even know she had left hope in her will.
Yeah.
So, but we do get together at least once a year, and then their names are on their plaque.
Beautiful. The final piece of the planned giving program is really having some type of, bucket or fund, to receive those types of gifts. Most of the time, that's in the form of an endowment. How many of you have an endowment at your church? Oh, most everybody does. So wonderful. Great. That's excellent. You should have that. You should encourage the planned gifts to go into that endowment that can be managed in perpetuity, create annual income, all of that stuff. And the last slide really just talks about the three major components of that, which is you have an investment policy that guides how you're going to invest the endowment. You have a spending policy that talks about how you're going to spend money from the endowments. And then you have some type of gift acceptance policy that talks about the different types of gifts you're going to, encourage people to use to make a gift to your endowment. That all rolled in together is your planned giving program, your legacy society, whatever. And we encourage you to do that. And I think the reason that Cliff says that this is easy money is because you're really not asking people to give up anything now. You're really asking them to plan for the future, and that's something they should be doing anyway. Only 54% of Americans have a will. Well, everybody has a will. If you didn't draft your own, your state probably has a will for you, and they're going to take care of your estate. So we encourage you to think about that. About 60% of Presbyterians have a will or have an estate plan, and out of that, only 8% of those actually leave the church in their estate plan. So that's about 5 people out of every 100 that have left the church in their estate plan at some level. And the average estate size-wise in the Presbyterian church is about $600,000, and the average estate gift is about $54,000. So this isn't necessarily, for the ultra wealthy. This isn't necessarily for, people of means. This is for everybody. And it's something that can be done. And again, I think that's why Cliff calls it easy, or an easy money or easy gift or easy thing to do, because it is just planning, and it is just putting that in place. And then it's carrying out, your faithful stewardship in death as you have in life. Okay. The last couple of slides I just want to talk to you about are some resources. There are wonderful resources everywhere. These are just a few that are, familiar to me because we use them and they're ours. But, our website has a toolbox in it with a whole bunch of resources on, stewardship, generosity, capital campaigns, endowments, planned giving, all of that stuff. You can look at that very easily. We have an online resource called the Stewardship Navigator. This is designed, it's free. It's designed to help you organize your stewardship campaign. It has a narrative budget builder. It has brochure builders. It has, different campaigns you can select. It has a calendar, year-round calendar of events. It's a wonderful way to just start organizing your stewardship campaign information. It has a way to store and share documents so you can talk to each other and all that stuff, so you don't have to pass, the folder from one stewardship chair to the next and all that stuff. And again, it's free. It's real helpful. The website's on this slide, or you can go to our website and find it. We also have a planned giving component in that Stewardship Navigator. So you can go in there and see it has a brochure builder. It has some flyers and some information on planned giving, but it's all in there. It's really helpful. And then I put on there the New Covenant funds. There is a family of mutual funds called New Covenant funds that are socially responsible, Presbyterian valued mutual funds that a lot of churches use for their investments, whether it's their endowment or their other funds. They use that as an investment. That's a good way to invest your money in a Presbyterian way because it's socially responsible. I put the New Covenant Trust Company on here also. That's a subsidiary of the foundation. They can do additional investing above and beyond the mutual fund platform that churches take advantage of. They have some fossil-free options. They have, some individualized portfolio management options. They do all of our individual trust work if someone wants to do a charitable remainder trust and stuff. But the New Covenant Trust Company is a very helpful place to go. And then I also mentioned the Ecumenical Stewardship Center. That stewardship.resources.org is the Ecumenical Stewardship Center. And they have a bunch of resources, the Giving Magazine, the Stu Bear book we talked about. Some other things are in there that can help with your stewardship campaign. Does anybody else have any resources they've stumbled across or anything they want to share with the group that they found that's been helpful? Because there are tons more. This is just a handful of ones. And then lastly on here, I did include some references. I think there's 2 pages of references. By references, I mean, it's a bibliography, basically. It's just books that we recommend that you use. I'll go through them real quick. The Bolsinger book at the top is really, if you haven't read it, it's called Canoeing the Mountains. It's really a guide for dealing with adaptive change. And Todd talks a lot about, the changing environment and how you deal with it and how you get, your church organization to deal with all of the change that's going on and how you adapt to be nimble and be effective and all of that. It's really a good book, just as kind of like a session retreat type of thing. I listed all of Cliff's books. Not Your Parents' Offering Plate is the first, but he's done 3 others. Actually, he's done 4 others. I don't think I have the 5th one on here. But they're really good and continue along that same theme of Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. Bill Enright's Kitchen Table Giving is a really good one. Again, Bill is the founder of the Lilly School of Philanthropy at IUPUI in Indianapolis. It's very statistical based, but it's very good at helping you understand donors. So if you're looking to be donor-centered, read Bill's book. It'll get you a good picture of what donors are thinking and how you become donor-centered. Joan Gray's book, The Sailboat Church, is a little bit like Todd's book. It's more of a how you deal in change. Her theme deals with a sailboat instead of a rowboat. And you can either row and you get exhausted rowing, or you can be a sailboat and use God's, guidance and intervention to be winds on your sail and push you along type of thing. She uses that kind of model to get her points across. Again, I've seen churches use that in good session retreats, visioning, those types of things. The Jameson's book is really good. It talks about ministry and money for pastors and how you do that. So if we're going to talk about money 17 times a year and you want some help on that, this book is good for that one. The Embracing Stewardship is good. It's really designed for stewardship chairs, Steve, like you mentioned, and Linda, that you volunteered to do here as well. It's really good for helping you, get an understanding of stewardship and some of the concepts we talked about. Holy Currencies is just an understanding of money and its role it plays in our lives and society. Scott McKenzie's book, Scott, is a colleague of Cliff's at the Horizon Stewardship. That's a really good book. It's basically 10 points about stewardship and coming from a place of abundance instead of scarcity. Henry Nouwen's book, A Spirituality of Fundraising, ties in the theology of fundraising, and it's really good to get that foundation. Gerald Panis does a book called Asking. It talks about how you actually ask for money which is good when it comes to do the solicitation letters and those types of things. And then the last book is The Millionaire Next Door, and it just talks about how hard it is to predetermine someone's capability, and it really uses the millionaire next door as a focal point of understanding that we don't always know what people's situations are, and what we need to do is to just, again, like that 2 Corinthians verse said at the beginning, you just need to plant a lot of seeds to harvest a lot later, because you never know what your neighbor next door has, or what their potential is, or what their capability is, or what their desire is, and you never know. And The Millionaire Next Door talks about, the very frugal older lady who, drives, a beat up car, school teacher, and she has just been frugal her whole life, and she ends up having millions at the end and leaves it to, different causes and stuff. You just never know. You can't judge. You've got to plant those seeds. You've got to spread the word. You've got to hope that the education opens people's hearts for God to touch, and that they will then act on it. And I think that Millionaire Next Door does a really good job of emphasizing that. So those are all the resources. Those are good things you can kick in, different that there are a plethora, obviously, of other ones, but those are ones we've done, and those books are ones that my colleagues and I have all vetted and read and done studies on, and feel like they're very helpful. So that's why we put those in there. That's a lot of information. I really appreciate you sticking with me and listening to all of that. Any last thoughts or last questions or anything before we adjourn? And a little early too, so.
We sure appreciate you making yourself available. We understand that you were willing to drive to us if we could have had this meeting in person, and we so appreciate that. And I know I've learned a lot today, and got written down a lot of notes to mull over and talk about, and some books to order too. So
yeah, there's a lot of them. Well, good. I appreciate that. Thank you, and you're very welcome.
Yeah.
I am available, to do this in the future, and I am working on finding a ministry relations officer for your territory. Minner Saravi retired in February, and we just have not found the right fit of a person. And then the pandemic hit, and that kind of has slowed us down. But I do have a plan in place to find a very capable and experienced person to help you all in the future. In the meantime, I gave you my contact information. Please lean on me. Let me know if there's anything we can do to help. If I can't, I'll get you to the right resource. But, y'all are important to us. We want to be partners alongside of you. Again, like I said earlier, man, your mission is our mission. We're here to help you. The world is only better by the work you do. And we want to help be a part of that and make sure you're successful. So let us know. And we'll do whatever we can, okay?
Can I pray us out before we close?
Say that again?
Would it be okay if I pray us out before we close?
That would be great. Thank you.
But you can go ahead and let anybody else talk. I just,
I would. Anybody else got any last thoughts or? All right, Linda, I guess it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for Steve, for his willingness to be with us today in whatever format we could do. Father, the church is all about serving you, and it's all about being a church family, knowing each other, caring for each other, having a vision of how we can serve you, how we can be invitational to those on the outside, as well as love those on the inside. And we just ask for you to be with us in our fall or winter campaigns. Help us to reach out in appropriate and efficient and effective ways, and help us to show love through our campaign. And we ask that you would help us to recognize how we might be more open and find more ways to talk about stewardship, time, talent, and treasure through the year, and not let it ever just rely on one campaign. It's all about giving you glory and honor, and we thank you and we praise you and lift you up. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good evening.